Welcome back. Another men's divorce podcast. This month, we've got two partners here from Cordell and Cordell. We'll be answering all of your questions live, and we're going to be discussing the topic, what do you need to know before filing for divorce? Cordell and Cordell, the largest domestic litigation firm of its kind. We've been advocating for fathers before, during, and after divorce. We've got over 30 years of experience in all facets of family law, and we're partners that men can count on. So please make sure you submit your questions. You can do it right there in the chat section there on YouTube or Facebook Live, and we'll go through and try to get as many as we can during the short time that we have with you today. This Men's Divorce Podcast is a live special monthly series. It's hosted by Men's Divorce Podcast and sponsored by Cordell and Cordell. So if you'd like to listen to more of our topics regarding the divorce or family law, please subscribe to the Men's Divorce Podcast on YouTube channel, or you can listen to our latest Spotify or Apple Music. Quick disclaimer, all the information we're giving you to hear today, we are not your attorneys. This is not an attorney-client relationship. That's not established through the webinar. So we encourage you to contact any of our offices if you need further legal advice. So before I introduce our panelists today, we're going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back. All right. Well, today I have with me Tamika Lee Cheney. She is a board certified in family law there in Texas. That's quite an accomplishment. Less than 10% of the attorneys in Texas are able to do that. Tamika is one of our litigation partners. She's been with Cordell and Cordell for almost 12 years now. Tamika is also one of the super lawyers and a rising star in Texas. So welcome to the program today, Tamika.
Thank you, Jonathan. I am happy to be here. Looking forward to the questions as well.
Yeah, well, right off the bat, as we're looking at the topic of how do I prepare for the divorce, I think one of the primary questions that I have when people come into my office, I have a lot of people who maybe don't want the divorce. They're kind of forced down a road that they really don't want to go on. And a lot of people will say, Jonathan, I don't want to go forward with this divorce, but what should I be doing to prepare myself ahead of time? What can I do that can help me in a divorce, but also won't really taint the marriage? What do you think about that, Tamika?
Well, so I always say a lot of it depends on that person's ultimate end goal if for some reason a divorce ensues. And that depends on whether or not that person is looking to ask for primary custody of a minor child or children in the divorce case if one is filed. If that person's asking to own the home when the divorce is finalized, there's a lot of questions that goes into what that person should be looking to do and preparing to do before they file for that divorce. And a lot of the things that I tell parties is you want to at least start considering collecting all of your financial records, making sure that you're looking into engaging what monies is being spent so that it's being spent fruitful and it's not being wasted. Because obviously when a divorce lawsuit is filed, those monies will begin to be expended a lot of times more quicker than one would anticipate for several different reasons. In addition, you want to also consider your minor children, and you want to make sure that you're engaging in a relationship with that minor child. Because obviously, when you're talking about children, a lot of it becomes what has happened and what has been the status quo prior to you filing for that divorce lawsuit. So you want to make sure that you're engaging with the minor children as much as possible.
Yeah, that's a great idea. When you take a divorce, you could really narrow it down to three categories. Every divorce, you're dividing property, you're dividing income, and you're dividing children.
Correct.
And in each of those categories, there's a lot of things you can do, during your marriage that will help your marriage. And if you get divorced, it also helps there. And so they're kind of win-win things for people who don't want to go down the path of divorce. Being a good dad, you mentioned. I mean, anything you can do to step in and really take care of those children, be a little bit more actively involved. It could be right down to doing laundry, doing chores. Those are going to help your marriage. Your wife's going to be happy. You're kind of leveling up. But if in the event you did divorce, you're creating this new precedence of you being a little bit more involved. You mentioned finances. I mean, I think getting your budget in order, really following a strict budget, trying to live within your means, not living off of debt, trying to cut down on your expenses. That's going to help when you look at an alimony situation later, to look at kind of that standard of living you've had during your marriage if you're leading a more modest lifestyle.
Correct.
Now, there's a lot of things that, and I guess it's almost it's not a plug for attorneys, but one of the first things you really should do is get legal advice. I mean, there's no way in our podcast we can cover everything that happens and what you should prepare for. Much like a doctor, you can't go on a doctor show and say, hey, if you don't ever want to do this and this, here's what you do. You need to go see the professionals. And there's a huge benefit there. Tamika, how early should somebody come see a legal professional in this process?
At any point in a situation where that person feels like there may be a divorce brewing, if the divorce word has been thrown out there, if there is some uneasiness in terms of the relationship, you want to at least get ahead of that situation so that you know what your options are, you know what to consider, and you know how to move in terms of what to do. And so I think it's going to be critical for you to at least consider consulting an attorney months in advance, even sometimes years in advance, just to make sure that you understand what may potentially happen down the road.
Yeah, that's great. Again, using kind of that medical analogy, I mean, the sooner you can make corrections to your course, the better off it is for sure. Now, that actually kind of leads me to one of our first questions that was made by Taylor. So Taylor is located in Texas, and he says, my soon-to-be ex is diving deep into our finances. I want to hire an attorney, but she'll notice immediately and things could blow up before I'm ready. How do I get an attorney started without her noticing it? So it's a great question, Taylor. You don't necessarily want to create an act of war before you're ready to fight the battle. So Tamika, how do we have Taylor or other guys in that situation kind of get started without kind of letting the cat out of the bag?
That's a great question. So I would always say, in order to circumvent that process of your spouse knowing that you're considering consulting with an attorney or retaining one, you may want to reach out to a family member or a friend and ask for a loan. And I would tell you that if you do that, make sure that it's documented in writing, signed under oath, that it is a loan that's being given, so that it's not considered as a gift when you actually move forward with the divorce case. But consider taking out a loan from a family member or a friend.
Yeah, it's amazing how many people really do have a great support network. I mean, you can do cash. I've seen guys who even just something as simple as every time they go to the grocery store, they take a $20 cash back until they've got kind of a chunk there. There's a lot you can do online. Men's Divorce has its own website. You can go on there. We've got these podcasts you can watch. Obviously, you got to be careful your browser history, that you're not setting up something that they're going to see that later and worry. And there's a balance there. I mean, obviously, if you're trying to save a marriage, means secretive can somehow disillusion and maybe break down some of the trust you're working on. So you got to be careful how you do it. But there is a lot of resources there. Well, as we look at kind of the steps of filing, first question people have is, I'm looking at divorce. I'm looking at getting started. Who do I talk to? How do I find a good attorney? What's the difference between a good attorney and a bad attorney? How do I even know? What do you think about that, Tamika?
I think it's important for everyone to do their homework, their due diligence, right? Because I mean, it's hard when you're looking for someone and you're asking for referrals, but referrals are important as well. But a lot of times it's the connections that you make with the attorney. And so I would tell you, begin by doing your research online, right? Making sure that that particular firm meets what your criteria are in terms of what you're looking to have done. There aren't a lot, or I don't know if there are any men divorce firms out there other than our firm. But I would tell you that obviously, because we focus on men divorce, we know what to look for, whether it's a resolution, meaning we're divorcing the parties by agreement, or whether or not we're going to court. We know what to gauge because we have that experience and that exposure because we do it all the time. So I would tell you, definitely do your research online beforehand.
And you kind of hit a point that's really important, that idea of specialization. It doesn't matter what you're doing in life. If it's a medical issue, you don't want a general practice person operating on you. Even if you, and this is particularly important for people that maybe are in a smaller town or more rural community, they're going to travel to the city to go get a specialist. Likewise, you should treat your divorce the same. Find somebody who specializes in family law. Don't get a general practitioner. They're great, and they're great for the niche that they're in. But this is your family, this is your livelihood, this is your financial future that's on the line. You don't want to leave that to a general practice. You want to find that person who specializes in divorce law, in family law. And one of the benefits, as you mentioned, Tamika, is even somebody who specializes in men's rights. There's a lot that happens there, lots of trends that you don't catch until you really are in that niche.
Correct.
All right. Well, the next question here that was brought up is talking about bank accounts and whether or not they should open bank accounts in their own names. Discussing whether the credit cards or the loans are in both of their names or in their own name. So again, Tamika, what are your thoughts on that?
So a lot of that becomes a question of what happens when your divorce is finalized. So if you open a credit card in your name and you and your spouse are using that card, you need to remember that when your divorce is over, that card remains in your name. And regardless of what a divorce judge says, the reality is the divorce judge can't authorize the wife or the other spouse to change that account into their name because they're not the persons who contracted with the credit companies. So you need to be careful in terms of opening accounts in your name unless you are prepared to maintain that account in your name. And that doesn't necessarily mean that your wife or your spouse won't be responsible for some of the monies owed on that account in the division of the estate. But the reality is that account itself with a debt on it will remain in your name, even though the court may assign your spouse to pay a portion of that in the division of the marital estate. So my advice would be tread lightly in that particular situation.
Yeah, I agree. Especially when it's a debt that can carry over, and the same goes with those bank accounts. If you ask a bank, if you've got two people on the account, a lot of people think, oh, it's a joint account. That means it's 50-50. Well, according to the bank, that's not the way it works. The way the bank looks at it is if you've got two names on it, it's 100%, 100%. And whoever wants to can just withdraw the entire fund. So you do want to be careful there if there's some trust issues, especially if you've seen something that's dishonest behavior in the past. People, you see times where, and Tamika, you probably had the same thing happen where a client shows up and says, hey, she took all the money. I had just a case the other day where it was a small business and he had money in this account to cover payroll for his company. And wife went in and took every dollar of that out, and he couldn't make payroll. He couldn't pay his vendors. He couldn't keep the doors and the lights on even.
Yep. And I would tell you, I have a philosophy. So most married spouses would say they know their spouse and there is no way their spouse would behave a certain way. I always tell people who say that you've never been through a divorce case because the reality is most people in divorce cases are great people. They're just behaving poorly because of the condition and circumstances that they're in. And so you don't necessarily know what that person may do when they're going through a divorce process. So you want to make sure that you're prepared for whatever actions may occur in that particular situation.
Yeah. Well, go into kind of some other things to think about as you get prepared. Joe Cordell wrote a book called The 10 Stupidest Mistakes Men Make in Divorce. Great chapters, 10 different chapters on each of these mistakes. First chapter 1 talks about moving out of the house. We talked about the 3 categories of divorce. Moving out of the house covers all 3, right? It's probably your number one asset. I mean, most people have more home equity than they have in their bank account. It's probably your biggest expense on the dividing income, and it's where your kids live. So Tamika, we've got a question about that. This is from Braden. He says, after 17 years, we're calling it quits. I plan to serve my wife. Right now, we live in the same home. And then he kind of asks, he'd like to get her out of the house. Should he leave? What should we do? They sort this out. What's your advice on the house?
So great question, Braden. So I would start by saying my initial response to a client would be, you do not need to be the one moving out of the marital home. So there's a lot of things that go into play when you're talking about a divorce action and someone moving out of the marital home. And a lot of those factors deal with if there's a child custody dispute, and you're asking the court to award you primary custody of the child, most courts want the child or the children to remain stabilized in the same home, as I said earlier. That means that if you've moved out of the marital home beforehand, you've set precedent for the court by telling the court, I'm okay moving out and leaving my children there because I've already done it. So you need to be careful because that minimizes your ability to be able to fight for primary custody of your child or your children in that scenario. In the
Yeah.
same breath, as it relates to Brayton, in a situation where if it's just the two spouses, you are now doubling your expenses while maintaining the same income. Because if Brayton is of the opinion that he will stay in the home, and if she moves out, he will pay her expenses where she is. He's now doubled his expenses, but his income remains the same. That means you're dwindling down your resources quicker at 2 times the pace that you would if you remained in the marital home. But there are circumstances, at least there's one that I know I would advise someone to move out if necessary. And that would be if there's a safety concern. If there's a concern about your life being in jeopardy, you definitely need to move out of the marital home. Call law enforcement, obviously, but you want to move out of the marital home. If that's not the case, I would advise any person do not leave the marital home for any reason.
Yeah, and it's a good point, and in most of those cases, if you're careful about how you present it to law enforcement, if there is a safety concern, it usually is the perpetrator who's going to leave, not you.
Right.
And so really kind of utilizing that. Now understand that when police officers show up to a home and there's a male and a female there, usually they're going to be looking at that male thinking maybe you're the perpetrator. So you need to make sure you've got careful evidence. You've got maybe your cell phone. The best thing you can have is one of these in your pocket, videoing what's going on. Now you don't want to get into it, but when you're leaving in the home, and this is a power struggle. I mean, you see it every time. You got to be really careful not to do anything that can be perceived as domestic violence. I have a client right now that got kicked out of his house. She took over the house. She got the kids. He hasn't even seen his kids for almost a month. You know why? Because he threw a package of bacon on the ground. He was cooking breakfast, threw the bacon on the ground because he got frustrated because she kept nagging and nagging. Here's a dad doing what's right. He's taking care of his kids. He's making food for the family, and she's nagging him and harping him, and he loses his temper just a little bit, throws the bacon on the ground. A great example. Very innocent. Doesn't seem like that big a deal. But guess what? She called the police. They arrested him for disorderly conduct and domestic violence, kicked him out of the house. So you got to be really, really careful to not even walk the line there. Another thing that comes up is, well, what about if I just move down into the other bedroom? What if I just kind of move down the hall or down into the basement? Again, I would tell you, the master bedroom is the driver's seat of the house. They call it the master bedroom.
Yep.
As soon as you start that move, it's a little easier to move again out of that house.
Correct.
Now, going a little bit more to what Braden was saying, what if we're trying to get the wife out of the house, in this case, his spouse out? I mean, what method do we have? Should he just go and lock the doors when she's at work? Should he board up the windows? What do you think, Tamika?
No, so I would say, the best relief is if she doesn't voluntarily agree to leave the home, is to file for the divorce and seek some sort of relief from the court, right? Because the reality is, a lot of times, at least here in Texas, if you began boarding up the home, changing the locks, the reality is it's still considered community property, meaning that property is owned by you and your spouse until a judge or unless a judge says otherwise. And because that property belongs to you and your spouse, if she breaks a window to get inside or breaks down the door, then guess what? It's community property. She did that to the community. So it's not that big of an issue. It's not like she's trespassing because she owns the property as well. So
Yeah.
I would tell you, seek relief from the court. If your spouse won't move out. But again, you need to be prepared. As Jonathan said, if you move out of that master bedroom, be prepared to move out of that house because that's the way out the door.
And, courts really don't like it when you take the law into your own hands. They call it self-help, and judges really, really don't like it. I mean, you lock her out, especially if you've got kids. I mean, that could really come back to bite you. Now, kind of following this trail, we've got the question about what about your stuff? Like, what happens? Worst case scenario is you do get kicked out. What happens if the court comes against you and you're out of the house? Is there a way we can protect all of our personal belongings, all the things that are in the house, from that happening?
Yeah, great question. So I would say yes. initially, before you file for a divorce lawsuit, that's one of the things you should consider doing is taking an inventory of every single item from your home to the garage, the shed, the storage facility, and what have you. And you want to make sure you're documenting everything, meaning you're taking photographs and you're making a written list of everything from the spoon to the lawn chair. Because at the end of the day, it's less likely for you to return to that marital home while the divorce is pending. That
Yeah.
means that you won't likely see those items anymore, and things starts to dwindle away and starts to disappear while a divorce is pending, and people forget, oh, I forgot I had this or I had that. You don't remember those things. So document, document, document before that divorce is filed.
And that's a little easier than it may sound. Just nowadays with our cell phones, you can just walk around the house with that on video mode,
Correct.
and just open a drawer, open a closet, and within a 5-minute video, you could have your whole house inventoried,
Correct.
and then you've got it, and you're just as safe. Now, if there are certain items that are really important to you, things that you're worried that she may, get rid of or sell, I mean, you can take those out of the house. I mean, again, you're really balanced on self-help versus, are you doing an act of war? But if there's certain memorability of yours that you kind of want to put somewhere else, I mean, I think it's okay to store it. You got to be honest. You can't sell it. You can't get rid of it. You can't change title. But if you're worried that she's going to take something or use it against you, I mean, you can take it. You can have a friend hold on to it for you in the middle of that. All right. Well, kind of going through these questions. The next one we've got that kind of came up was, what do we need? What information should somebody have when they come into an attorney? What kind of information should they start gathering ahead of time? Tamika, what would you love? I mean, if I walked in to meet with you for the first time, what do you want me to bring with you? What information should I have ready on my fingertips?
So we're talking about the first time that we meet, I would say I need financial records, right? I need to know what the income and resources are that you and your spouse have. So I want to see pay stubs. I want to see tax returns, right? I need to be able to gauge what the expenses are. In addition, I would also say I would like to know what sort of debt you and your spouse has. So I want to see credit card statements. I want to see retirement account statements. I want to see the banking statements. So I would tell you that the finances are going to be critical in any aspect, whether there are minor children or not. But in cases where there are minor children, I would say I would love to see what tends to disappear when a divorce suit is filed, and that is social media accounts. Social media accounts are like jewels. There are things on there that you yourself may not feel is critical or important to your divorce case, but an attorney, a family law attorney sees it and they're like, oh, this is golden. So I would tell you, because those accounts or things on those accounts tend to disappear, take photographs. If you have access to your spouse's social media account or you are their social media friend, take photographs of all those things, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, TikTok, you name it. Document those things in advance before you file for the divorce. And then I would also say one important factor is if there are some concerns about infidelity, you want to at least consider hiring a private investigator before the divorce lawsuit is filed so that you can document whatever is happening beforehand, because people tend to change their behavior once a lawsuit is filed. So you will already have your evidence in the bag before you file, or a lot of it. So you don't necessarily need to try to go and redo or create what's already occurred, because now you can't do it. You will already have those documents in your possession.
That's good. Yeah. One of the first things I'll talk to with clients is I kind of want to know, again, going back to those 3 categories, what's your net worth? What do we have? What's your house worth? What's your car worth? What do you have in your retirement accounts and your bank accounts? Just having that readily available. And it doesn't have to be right down to the dollar, but if you can say, hey, I've got $2,000 or $20,000, I mean, that makes a big difference in kind of knowing right from the very beginning what it is we're even dealing with, as we kind of help you find the right fit and find the right plan for you. Knowing what your income is, knowing what your wife's income is helps. Even knowing some of her, sometimes maybe the spouse doesn't work. So kind of knowing the background, what did she used to earn before you started having kids?
Right.
is really helpful.
There's some other ones too that I didn't consider, but we should also think about text messages and emails, because again, those are golden in family law cases. So if you can store the text messages and emails in the event your phone is destroyed or something happens and you lose it, save those text messages. And when I say saving the text messages, you can go to the phone companies and ask them what's the easiest way to be able to print or document all of these text messages, and or you can screenshot those text messages. But if you do it yourself, just be prepared to capture the dates of those text messages so that it's easier for the courts to be able to understand when those communications took place.
Great. All right. Well, the next question, we have kind of two I categorized here together from two different people, and I'll ask both questions. So first question was, should a parenting plan be created and presented to your soon-to-be ex before you file? Somebody else said, should a plan be set in place on what you want to keep and what you're willing to negotiate during divorce before filing and talking to attorneys? So very similar, kind of when do we make a plan? When do we start negotiating? When do we start talking to the spouse about what we're wanting to see happen here? What are your thoughts on that, Tamika?
So I would say in these situations, it really depends. This really depends. It's a case by case situation, and it's a fact by fact situation. If your spouse and yourself are getting along very well, and you've been co-parenting well, and there is no volatility, there are no disputes, and you both are equally agreeable to getting a divorce and moving forward and co-parenting as you had been doing, I would say it's worth considering having a conversation with your spouse about what that looks like regarding your parenting time with your children. However, there are situations in which if there is one parent, i.e., if you yourself are looking to request primary custody of the child or children, you presenting that to your spouse and outlining a possession schedule for your spouse may not necessarily be favorable to you in terms of doing it before your divorce lawsuit is filed. That kind of it eliminates the sting that you would have in terms of a negotiating factor when the divorce lawsuit is filed, whenever we start going through the process of trying to resolve your divorce case. So I would tell you that a lot of it just depends on your particular situation and your end goal. If your goal is to obtain primary custody, my advice would be probably not the best idea to engage with your spouse about it beforehand. But if your goal is to not maintain primary custody of your child, then it's worth having a conversation with your spouse about what your possession time would look like.
Yeah, something you said that I really liked is it kind of comes down to these attorneys. I mean, when you hire an attorney, you're hiring them for many reasons. I mean, and attorneys have lots of different names. One of the names that we go by is counselor. An attorney is a counselor. He can counsel with you on what's reasonable, what's not reasonable, what will the court accept. I mean, we've all seen cases where two people without attorneys come through and they make some sort of deal, and it's horrible.
Mm-hmm.
And it's ridiculous, especially these deals that are made by guilt. I mean,
yes.
People will feel bad about some actions they've made, maybe some mistakes they've made, and they make deals that last them 30, 40 years in the future that they never can get above and never get around. And judges lots of times will say, hey, look, you made your bed, you're going to sleep in it. You made the contract. So getting an attorney involved early, we can counsel with them what's reasonable. The other thing is we're professional negotiators.
Right.
I mean, Tamika, look at your day and your week. I mean, how much of the time are you negotiating in a 40-hour week?
95%, if not more. The entire process is negotiation and strategy, which is what we primarily do at Cordell. We strategize, and it's about negotiations.
Yeah. So when a client comes in, like any good chess set, we want as many pieces of that chess set we can move around as possible to get what we really feel is a favorable deal. And if a client comes in and they've already negotiated half of those pieces away, it kind of ties our hands. We don't have quite as much leniency on what we can help. With the experience that we have, we kind of know what works, what doesn't work. I had a conversation with a client today, even he had some questions about kind of what he thought was what's right. And the question was kind of, well, he's only done one divorce. That was it.
Right.
How many divorces have I done? How many divorces have I helped people through? Thousands and thousands. And, in the career. And obviously at Cordell, you're not just hiring an attorney, you're hiring a whole firm of people who have it. So letting your attorney, keep an open mind to the ideas the attorneys have. The great thing about this is when you're in a negotiation, the sky's the limit. Judges, on the other hand, they really don't have a lot of options. Our judges are very narrowly focused. They can say you win, you lose, you get this, you get that. If you can keep it away from the judge, and you and your wife and the attorneys can sit down, and that kind of brings up words we hear a lot. Like one of the words we hear is mediation or settlement or arbitration. Tamika, what are we talking about when we're talking about negotiating or mediation?
Yeah, great question. So, just to be clear, like I had a situation similar to your situation that you referenced regarding a client where, as recent as today, I had a conversation, and unfortunately, my client negotiated with his soon-to-be ex-spouse before the divorce lawsuit has been filed in regards to what assets he will be willing to give her. And I said to him, I said, well, um, was this in writing? And he said, well, yes, we kind of wrote it down. And I said, well, I just want you to understand that a lot of times in these situations, your starting point, once the divorce lawsuit is filed, the starting point is where you ended off before you filed that lawsuit. So if you ended off with, I'll agree, you can have X number of dollars. I'm telling you, by the time we get to mediation, in terms of trying to resolve your case by agreement, the starting point is going to be that X number that you left off with before. So you need to be very careful in terms of trying to negotiate factors with your spouse outside of legal counsel. And mediation, arbitration, those sorts of things is just another way for us to try to resolve your case amicably outside of court, where you and your spouse are the ultimate decision makers in terms of the outcome. Because the reality is, no one knows you, your spouse, and or your children and what's best for you better than yourselves. The attorneys are instrumental in helping you to get where you need to get to, but you and your spouse are the ones who ultimately get to make that decision if you go to mediation or arbitration. If you go to court, the court has no clue who you are, the court has no clue who your spouse is, and at the end of the day, the court will do something that no one will ultimately like. And so I always tell people, if you can try to resolve it through mediation or arbitration, then it's best to do that. But you need to have legal counsel so that whatever you agree to is legally and is instrumental and it's enforceable whenever your case is dissolved.
Great advice. And it really comes down to, you just don't want to do this on your own. You need a partner. You can make so many mistakes. I've had people tell me, but Jonathan, I can't afford counsel. My response is always the same. You can't afford not to have counsel. If your finances are that tight, you can't afford not to get the help you need. Well, I appreciate everybody's joining us here today. Tamika, thank you so much for being our guest today. We appreciate you having you on here. If you'd like more information, feel free to schedule a virtual consultation with us, or you can do it in person. All you got to do is call the number on the bottom of the screen. That's 866-DADS-LAW. You're welcome also to visit our website, cordellcordell.com. You can get on. We can get you in front of another attorney right away. They can do an hour consultation. You'd be surprised how much information we can pack into 1 hour. It's important to know our attorneys are not on commission. I don't think most attorneys in family law are even allowed by the state bars to be on commission. So when you pay for an hour of advice, you're going to get an hour of education from that attorney with no strings attached. So definitely, at the end of the day, if I could leave you with just one thought, it is get legal advice, get help. You'd do the same if it was a medical issue. You wouldn't be slicing yourself open with a knife. You'd be going and talking to a doctor before you start doing that. So we recommend you do the same. All right. Well, this live webinar today was presented by and produced by Lexicon, which is a legal technology company that's been our support. We've had them with us at Cordell for many years. They're a great partner that we have. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. And again, thank you, Tamika, for what you've done today and your contributions.
You're welcome. Thank you. Have a great day.